My guest is Harold Troper, professor of history at OISE and author of The Defining Decade, Identity Politics, the Jewish Community in the 60s. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
We've already had a session, but there's so much I want to discuss from this book. One of the things I didn't do last time was set the demographics, because one thinks of the Jewish community as increasing. You do a survey and people say, oh, 10% or 15% of Canadians are Jews, and in fact the numbers are under 2% and they're declining.
They're declining.
Can you set that stage of the demography? Jews are a very tiny population in Canada.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact figure, but they had gone to below 2% of the population. Jews, certainly by the 1960s, were beginning to marry later. Delayed marriage so that they could stay longer in schools. They were having smaller families. The Jewish community was embracing birth control, and the numbers were going down. But there was the illusion, certainly in Toronto and in Montreal, where as I said the last time, more than 80% of all Jews live, that the Jewish community was indeed growing. And why was that? One, because there was some immigration, but even more important to the community was a net inflow into the city of Jews from smaller communities. And also, Jews continue to live in Canadian Jews continue to live in close proximity to one another. So whether or not the Jewish community was growing nationally or not, there was the feeling in the Jewish community that everybody had Jewish neighbors, that Jews, the Jewish community itself was expanding and growing. So even though the numbers, the statistics showed a decline, and the community was, the Balabatim were certainly aware of this. They kept very close tracks of Jewish numbers. The sense in the Jewish street was of growth, of enormous numbers of people, a vibrant Jewish communal life here in Toronto, in Montreal, and in Winnipeg as well. One of the things I say about Winnipeg is even though the Jewish community moved, it did not move apart. The Jewish community tended to cleave to one another, and this gave the sense in the community of growth.
Well, we talked last time about changes in Canada becoming fully Canadian, becoming not American but Canadian, various things that happened in Canada. But your book also talks about the world events. One of the events is, of course, the Holocaust, and I thought that was undertreated. Not that you didn't talk about the Holocaust, you didn't talk about the Eichmann trial.
Yeah.
And the Eichmann trial is 1961.
The capture was in 61.
The capture is 61, and you have the trial subsequently. And the trial has, I think, in my interpretation, an enormous effect on consciousness of Jews around the world. It's not there, and if it's a book about a defining decade, I wondered why you didn't put it in.
Well, I think I mentioned
yeah, it's mentioned,
right.
But it's just mentioned.
I think the impact of the trial was much more immediate in Israel than it was here. I think the impact seeps in North America. I think that one of the things that the Eichmann trial did in a strange way was it took a little while, but it shifted the Holocaust from being a kind of private agony of the survivor to it mainstreamed it within the Jewish community. It became a communal event. It became a communal piece of collective Jewish history. That as somebody once said to me about his own family, he said, "My family may not have been on Schindler's List, but we certainly were on Eichmann's list." And I think that gradually began to seep in. Certainly, the consequences of the emergence of the Holocaust as part of a kind of collective Jewish consciousness. It took a few years, but it comes out very, very clearly in the communal Jewish response in Canada to the emergence of little neo-Nazi groups in Toronto and Montreal,
Yeah, but
and even more during the lead up to the Six-Day War.
well, here you spend, don't want to spend any more time on it because I want to get to the Six-Day War. You spend 10% of the book, I counted, is spent on this fringe group of Nazis because it has an effect on the politics of the internal Jewish. But it's not the big thing. And that you didn't talk about the Eichmann trial. So I felt cheated there because exactly what you described, I think, is true. But I thought you should have played that up more. Let's go to the Six-Day War because you do deal with that, how that radically changes the community. Can you sum up your thesis there? Because I think it's dead on, and I think you elaborated very well.
I think that the Six-Day War came as not only as a shock, as a kind of a shock that the thing took place, because it seemed to come, as far as the Jewish community was concerned, out of nowhere. But it also, I think, the Jewish community, in a sense, was shocked by its own response, because it didn't happen a little over 10 years earlier during the 1956 Sinai War. And I think the difference, to go back to our previous conversation, the difference between the Sinai War in 1956 and the 1967 war was the intervening play that the Holocaust had. When the 1967 war was, and the most important part of the 1967 war in terms of the Jewish community was not the war itself, but the 2 weeks that led up to it.
Agree, that's what I read,
Right.
the fear.
In that 2 weeks, a fear gripped the Jewish community, not just in Canada, but around the world, that Israel was about to be destroyed.
And what you make in your book, it's not just the mainstream Jewish community.
No.
It's Jews that didn't identify as Jews. It's
Jews came
marginal
out of the
Jews,
woodwork.
yeah.
Jews who, somebody used to call them white Jews. Jews who had largely had a sense of themselves as having transcended their Jewishness, were now part of the communal mainstream and so on. They suddenly found a sense of Jewishness that was perhaps dormant but not disappeared. And they emerged out of nowhere. And what I think happened was it was a fear that if a Jewish democratic state in Israel was in threat of being destroyed, and nobody, and this was the key, and this is why it made the resonances of the Holocaust were so clear, was the prevailing sense that nobody cared, that nobody was going to take steps. All of that pre-war effort on the part of the Jewish community was not just to raise money to support Israel. It was to raise money and to apply pressure to prevent the war, because the war was going to be a cataclysmic event that was going to destroy the infrastructure, maybe destroy the state. And it seemed that nobody else cared except other Jews. And therefore, I think those Jews who saw themselves as assimilated began to worry that their sense of who they were, their shelteredness, was also in threat. They emerged from the kind of shadows into the Jewish community in a part of fear for who they were and what they were going to go through if Israel ceased to exist.
Well, I think you got it dead on, because the way I saw you writing it is that we became visceral Jews in the 60s. And all the ideological divisions, Bundists, this, that, communists, the capitalists, all got set aside, and suddenly all Jews were visceral Jews. I'm going to end at that. We're going to come back We're going to have a third session. I'm not satisfied yet. So we're going to have a third session with you and another program, and we're going to have you come back. Again, Hesh Stroper, author of The Defining Decade. Thanks, Hesh. Olive oil was celebrated for its health-giving qualities, now attributed to the high content of monounsaturated fatty acids and antioxidants. Next week, we explore the health qualities of olive oil in Olia in Tel Aviv. Do the Israeli Defense Forces have analogous health-preserving qualities? Did it have them in Lebanon? Join us next week for Olive Oil and the IDF. I do hope you enjoyed tonight's show. We aspire to provide high quality as well as entertaining and objective programming that will inform, enlighten, and enrich the public's knowledge of Israel and the Jewish world. Comments are always welcome. So our memberships, please join. I hope you'll tune in next week. I'm Howard Edelman. Good night until then.